Excellent. And you can go ahead and begin whenever ready.
Hi, everybody. My name is Moses Kusisira. I'm the CEO of SMG Snap, and I have Michael Richardson as well on the other line. And today we're going to talk to you about supporting aggregators in Moduloop. So we'll just go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. All right, so how do we define aggregators from a Moduloop perspective? Basically, aggregators are systems that request payments from other participants with requesting payments from the payer's DFSP. Some of these systems request split payments, example like the Snap system. They request split payments so that they can pay different payers DFSP based on the specific business model. An example we'll go through today is buying a ticket from a football team. Another definition of an aggregator is systems that basically issue payments requests directly to the payee's DFSP, supporting an all or nothing transfer or any of many transfers, meaning that either one transfer, if one transfer goes through, all of them go through. If one transfer does not go through, then the whole thing fails. That's all or nothing. Or any of many, which means that any transfer can go through while others fail. Also, a definition of an aggregator is basically a system that pays bills on behalf of the customers. We'll talk about that as well. We think this is a great system or great addition if we can add it into the Moduloop switch itself. Next slide, please. Furthermore, an aggregator is defined as a direct participant in a settlement. So any basically system that basically settles the payment on the DFSP side or relies on the relationship between customers and DFSP who own customers' transaction accounts. We'll talk about a little bit about that in the bill section as well. Next slide, please. So what sort of entities might be aggregators? Entities basically that take care of bill aggregation services. For example, entities that pay bills for, electricity bill or power bill. But the idea is that when the customer makes a single payment to the aggregator distributes these payments to the different bill providers, right? And then confirms that the customer's account on the organization side is paid off. Entities who accept payments which need to be dispersed across multiple beneficiaries, for instance, entities with a portion bill payment across multiple creditors, or who allow customers to pay their creditors from a portion of the receipts. This is an all or nothing example, and this is basically where if one payment fails, basically the whole thing fails, it doesn't go through. Entities like Snap that basically split payment in a marketplace, so where you have different vendors and the customer is buying one product that comes from different vendors. For example, paying for school fees or paying for a child to go to school requires school fees, requires shoes, books, uniform. Those are all different vendors. So when you're doing that payment, you're supposed to be able to split the payment to the different vendors. Entities that provide bulk services like running payroll, the customers basically submit a single payroll and the service splits it into separate batches by paying the payee DFSP and submits the individual payrolls and returns a consolidated report to the customer, basically showing, which batches have been paid or which payroll have been paid. This has also been canvassed as a potential switch upgrade consumed by DFSP, but it might take more sense to adjust this. This is one of the any of many examples. So here, basically, unlike the all or nothing example, when one transaction fails, doesn't mean that all of them have to fail. The others can go through while even if one fails, because it's basically doing a payroll to one specific system, does not have to kill the whole settlement. Next slide, please. So what will the aggregator use case look like? Let's go ahead and basically look at an example. And the example we are looking at today is the being able to buy a ticket to a game, let's say a football game. And when you have a situation like that, or when you have a system that basically sells tickets, there is a few different DFSPs that you'll be dealing with, and clients, should we say, that will be basically receiving payments. So you have the actual platform itself, and then you have the team, and then you also have the stadium where the game is being played. So when somebody makes a payment to purchase the ticket, let's say it's for 1,000 Tanzanian shillings, basically you'll have an aggregator do split payments and be able to transfer different funds to the different vendors. So the aggregator sends a request to the switch, which will describe the proposed transfer. So that, first of all, this is an all or nothing. One of them fails, everything fails, right? And so the first transaction is basically pay 100 Tanzanian shillings to the aggregator, which in this instance is the platform that's selling the ticket. Pay $100 to the government tax account. In this instance, we're paying the taxes as well, so the government can get their tax immediately. And then pay 800 Tanzanian shillings to the football team, basically that's selling the ticket. So the switch should be able to acknowledge all these three different payments or the split of the three different payments, and basically be able to send the request in, and the request remains open at that specific moment. So what happens next? Let Michael take from here.
Thanks very much, Moses. So what you're seeing on the screen now is an abbreviated example of a request that is part of the Mojaloop system now. We've extended it in some ways to support the split payment thing, but essentially it's a transaction request, which is a request, for instance, that today a merchant might send to say, please pay, or please ask your customer to pay me the amount he owes. So it's not a new thing, it's an extension of an existing thing. So let's look at some characteristics of this. First of all, we are sending to something that we've called bulk processor. And that essentially means that we're sending it to the switch and not, in the first instance, directly to a DFSP, because we're expecting the switch to break down the payment and to make the payment to the people who are eventually going to receive it. Second, we specify by saying commitment rule is all or nothing, that all parts of the transfer must succeed for the transfer to succeed. And that's a way of saying, as we've said before, that if any of parts of the transfer fail, then everything must fail and be rolled back. Next, we specify that we don't want to return per payee information to the payer. So what we want is for our customer, when they see they've made a payment, to see something on their statement that says, I made a payment to the aggregator. It was a payment for a football ticket, as it turns out, but they don't want to see something that says, I paid this amount to the aggregator and this amount to the football team and this amount to the government tax account. So that says we can decide whether or not to disclose full information about the payments, which we would want to do, for instance, if this were a payroll payment, they would want to see everybody who had been credited. But in this case, they don't. They just want to see a single overall payment. Now, also, we don't want to need to specify which DFSP owns the customer. Now, that's part of the normal Mojaloop system, but in this case, we want the switch to sort that out. Also, we don't want to specify the amount, the overall amount of the transfer. We want the switch to calculate that from the payee amounts. And now, finally, We support any number of payees, which is what that little bracket after payee says. So you can have 2 here, or 1 here, or 20, or 50, as many as you like. Now again, we want the switch to identify the participants who own the payee accounts. We want to say, here is the identifier, you tell me where that account is located. Is it at a bank? Is it at the mobile money system? So again, we want to let the switch do that work rather than expecting the aggregator to do that work themselves. So that's the message itself. Now let's look at what the process is like. So first of all, the switch checks which participants own the payer and each of the payees. So that's identifying who should I ask to take the money, who should I ask to credit with the money. If any of them can't be identified, then the switch just responds with an error and the whole transfer request is cancelled, because obviously if we can't find either the person to take the money from or the people to pay the money to, nothing more can happen. Next, the switch calculates the total payment that the payer will need to make. In this case, it's 1,000 Tanzanian shillings, as Moses said. And then the switch generates a request for the payer DFSP to make a payment of the total amount to the PISP, to the aggregator. This should ensure that the transfer shows up correctly in the customer statements, i.e. with the payer DFSP, to say, I paid 1,000 shillings to the aggregator, in this case, Snap. And it's a consequence of selecting abbreviated payer information, as we saw before. So now the payer DFSP requests a quotation from the PISP. For each of the payees, the switch generates a quotation request for the amount of that, the payees thing. So it'll generate 3 in this case, 1 for 100 shillings to Snap, or to Snap's DFSP, 1 for 100 shillings to the government tax accounts DFSP, and 1 for 800 shillings to the football team's DFSP. It will store the response together with the condition. If any of them are rejected, then the switch rejects the original quotation request from the payer DFSP, the customer's DFSP, and says that's nothing more can happen. But if they're all accepted, then the switch accepts the payer's quotation request. These are managed through existing functionality. We don't have to do anything more in order to do this. There are some open questions. How should we guarantee this response? Should it be the switch or the PISP that generates it? Or should it possibly be a composition of the conditions returned by the payee DFSPs? Now, the payer requests a transfer to the aggregator. The switch reserves the DFSP's funds to make sure that the DFSP, the customer's DFSP, can settle the amount of the transfer. And then the switch constructs transfer requests to each of the payees, to the aggregator's DFSP, to the tax account's DFSP, and to the football team's DFSP, based on the responses they gave above. And the switch requests each payee not to clear the payment until it receives confirmation. Now, this is functionality that we already have in the switch, that a payee can say, I won't clear this payment until I get confirmation from the switch, until I'm sure that the switch has registered that I will get credited. And in this case, we will send a message to the payee DFSP to say, please don't clear this payment until you receive confirmation. Open question, should the payer DFSP in this request be the switch or the original payer DFSP? But that's something we could answer a bit later on. Finally, each DFSP responds with success or failure. When they've all responded, the switch registers all of the transfers, and the payer DFSP is debited with the total amount, and each payee is credited with its portion of the transfer. You'll notice that this doesn't require the use of escrow accounts. So nobody's storing funds in transit. the payer, DFSP, doesn't have to commit its funds until it's sure that everybody has got the funds, or sorry, has agreed to the transfers, and the payees get their funds individually. They're transferred directly, and they can be checked against each other. So it then confirms the payer DFSP that its transfer has succeeded, and the final transfer request for the PISP has succeeded. So now it sends something back to the SNAP application saying, yep, that purchase that you requested, it's gone through, everybody has been paid, you can issue the ticket. So that's how this works in practice. I can see that a hand is raised, Oscar, but I'm going to keep going for the moment and pass back to Moses so that he can talk about bill payment confirmation. And with your permission, Oscar, I will pick up your question later on.
Thanks, Michael.
Moses.
Okay, all right. So what's our definition of bill payment? Basically, it's where the customer wants to pay an organization with whom they have an account with. They will specify the account of the organization that they want to pay. They are not very interested in whether the payee's organization account has been credited with funds, but they are interested if their account at the organization is credited with funds. Next slide, please. So the question basically is, how should we get confirmation from the payee institution that the customer's account with them has been credited? What we suggest, our proposal is, we allow entities who want to support bill payments in the Mojo Loop scheme directly, okay? And then they only need to basically support very lightweight interface, two basically resources. The first one is request to pay. They need to be able to receive a request to pay a customer account that they own, and that will be authenticated by the account that will be credited. And then they need to be able to respond to that request with a confirmation that the customer's account exists. And then the second one is basically payment confirmation. They need to receive a request to credit the nominated customer account with the amount of funds that have to be transferred to the nominated utility account. And then they also need to respond to the request with a confirmation that that customer's account has been credited in the amount paid. And basically we allow the switches aggregator service to generate these requests and confirm as part of their management of the aggregation request. So from the aggregator side, they'll be handling all this. And then we allow the aggregator to specify this account as part of their request to the aggregator service. And basically that's it. And I think you can take that question.
Okay, Oscar.
Okay, in the quote stage, you say that in your description, you say that if any of the quotes fails for any reason, the whole bulk is going to be rejected by the switch.
Yes.
Okay. In the near past, I've been in some implementation like that. There is a way to fix the same request, or the the source need to send another request completely new.
In a situation like this, the source will need to send a completely new request, because the situation that we're talking about, for instance, is where the setup has meant that the payment is being made to an account which doesn't exist or perhaps is suspended. So the payment can't be made. And in cases like the all or nothing cases that we've been talking about, for instance, where someone is trying to do a split payment, you can't do some of the pay, you can't do part of the payment. It's got to be all done or nothing. You can't buy the ticket without paying the tax. You can't pay the tax without buying the ticket. So that says everything needs to succeed or nothing succeeds. There are other instances, the marketplace that we talked about, bulk payments for payroll, those sorts of things, where we would say, well, the fact that someone's account is suspended and can't be credited doesn't mean that nobody else in the company should be paid. It just means that we allow the ones that succeed to succeed and the ones that fail to fail. But we want some way of indicating to the switch what rules are governing this payment.
Okay, you answered already my next question. Thank you so much, Dr. Richards.
Thank you. Has anyone else got any questions that they would like to raise?
Michael, there's a few in the chat.
Lots of things in the chat. Ding, 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 ding. Oh. Can you indicate, I can certainly indicate process on coding it, but we are hoping to move forward on that. Sorry, can I elaborate on, sorry, I don't mean to be flippant. This is a proposal. There is no movement so far that I am aware of in deciding on how this should work at the interface level or indeed in coding stuff at the back of it. But that doesn't mean that there couldn't be quite quickly, I think. I mean, it's reasonably well elaborated. Sorry, I want to go back. There's another question from Drew saying, can I elaborate on the connection between aggregators and bill payments? So one of the kinds of aggregators that we envisaged, and Moses talked about that earlier on in the presentation, are the kinds of companies that basically say, we will manage all of your bill payments. You make a single payment to us, and we will arrange for the people you owe to be paid either in order or by proportion or in some other way. Now, part of the value that that service has to offer is the ability to say with confidence to you, yes, I paid your electricity bill, and the electricity company has confirmed that your account has been credited, your account with them, that is, has been credited. So that's why there is a connection between the aggregators and bill payments, as we see it in the last slide. Does that answer your question? So there's a question here. Thank you, Drew. A question here from Paul Baker that says, can the multi-ledger functionality of the ILP be used to facilitate the bill payments? And I think the answer to that is probably no. We did think about that as a way of doing it. And in the end, we rejected it as a way of tying all of the payments together. But that isn't to say that we wouldn't think about it again. As I said, we talked in reasonable detail about how we imagine the APIs and the interfaces would work for this business case, but we could still think about different ways of implementing it inside the switch. So the answer is, Paul, it could in principle, but we haven't worked that a bit out yet. Any other questions that anyone would like to raise? In that case, I will hand you back to Moses.
All right. Thanks, everybody. That's all from me.
Thanks. Bye.